Oil and gas is owned by the provinces, principally Alberta, and we won't stand for that. And you should never, ever threaten something you cannot do.
The federal government and the majority of premiers in Canada are asking Alberta to enter into a suicide pact in the cult of Canadian Confederation, where only one province is expected to drink the poisoned Flavor Aid, and that's Alberta, because it's always Alberta. Well, I've got a message for these people, and I'm asking you to help me spread it. Go to handsoffalberta.com to learn more.
If they were to proceed down that path for some reason, what would be Alberta's response?
Well, they will have a national unity crisis on their hands at the same time as having a crisis with our U.S. trade partners. We just won't stand for that. And I don't think Ontarians and Quebec should stand for that as well.
Every single premier other than Danielle Smith then chose to put Canada first and say, but we're all part of Team Canada, because what happens to any part of us happens to all of us, and we will be there to respond strongly, to fight for Canada, and to do it in a united way that makes sure that it's fair across all industries, across all regions. That was what we came together yesterday to do.
Now, the federal government, which has absolutely no jurisdiction over the export of provincial resources like oil and gas to the United States, is asking Alberta to shut off our oil and gas to the U.S. in response to Trump's threats of tariffs.
Is your government prepared to cut off supplies of energy, for example, to the United States?
What I can tell you is everything is on the table.
Premier Smith has specifically said that there would be a national unity crisis if energy exports were on the table. So is your government in any way considering the restriction of oil from Alberta to the United States?
So what we've said is that the only responsible thing for the national government is to acknowledge that all options are on the table.
We have made it very clear that everything is on the table as potential responses.
We're not doing this again. We will not allow ourselves to be sacrificed on the altar of some misplaced jingoistic sentiment one more time by another Liberal government. If you stand with Albertans in defense of our jobs and our economy, please go to handsoffalberta.com, sign the petition, and get involved and help me take this message to the rest of the country. Now, the last time the federal government thought they could control Alberta's oil patch, it devastated our economy through the National Energy Program, forcing us to sell our oil at a reduced rate to the rest of the country to help them out. We lost over a generation of wealth and economic activity because of the last Trudeau government's overreach into provincial jurisdiction. Some of us still remember it, and we will not do this again. And devastating Alberta is going to devastate the rest of the country as the rest of the country tries to survive these incoming Trump tariffs.
You said you were considering military force to acquire Panama and Greenland. Are you also considering military force to annex and acquire Canada?
No, economic force. Because Canada and the United States, that would really be something. You get rid of that artificially drawn line, and you take a look at what that looks like. And it would also be much better for national security. Don't forget, we basically protect Canada. But why are we supporting a country, 200 billion plus a year? Our military is at their disposal. All of these other things, they should be a state. That's why I told Trudeau when he came down, I said, what would happen if we didn't do it? He said Canada would dissolve. Canada wouldn't be able to function. We're going to put very serious tariffs on Mexico and Canada, because Canada, they come through Canada too, and the drugs that are coming through are at record numbers. So we're going to make up for that by putting tariffs on Mexico and Canada, substantial tariffs.
I'm going to show you the numbers today. I'm going to ask for you to help me get the message out that a strong Alberta can help save Canada. And I'm going to show you how shutting off oil and gas to the United States will cut off the supply to Ontario and Quebec, creating energy shortages and a crisis there. Your head is going to be swimming from these numbers, but you need to hear it because you're not going to hear it from the mainstream media. In 2019, the GDP associated with Canada's oil and gas sector totaled $139.2 billion, or 6.4% of the total Canadian economy. in 2019, the output or value of goods and services that the Canadian oil and gas sector and its supply chain produced was $253.2 billion, representing about 6.2% of Canada's total output. Now, all in, that's over $1 trillion in government revenue between 2000 and 2032, if we're able to produce it. Now, what does this mean to Ontario Premier Doug Ford, who wants Alberta to take an economic cyanide tablet for him? Well, let me tell you. According to the Canadian Energy Centre research, based on federal data, oil and gas supported 71,000 direct and indirect jobs in Ontario in 2017 alone and paid $2.1 billion in workers' income. The sector added $7.7 billion in nominal GDP to the Ontario economy and purchased $7.3 billion worth of goods and services from other Ontario industries, including $4.3 billion from Ontario manufacturing businesses. Now let's look at BC just for fun. According to Statistics Canada, in 2017, the oil and gas sector, largely based in Alberta, was responsible for adding nearly $9.5 billion in nominal GDP to the BC economy. It generated nearly $18 billion in outputs, consisting primarily of the value of goods and services produced by various sectors of the BC economy. It supported over 62,000 direct and indirect jobs in BC and paid over $3.1 billion in wages and salaries to workers in BC. And do Ontarians really understand where they get their oil and gas from? Doug Ford does not want you to know. A lot of it comes from Alberta, sure, but it is not a direct route across the Canadian prairies and then the Canadian Shield to your gas pumps in Toronto, Ottawa, and Montreal. Here's my premier explaining it.
I would encourage the minister to look at a map of where Line 5 goes. Line 5 comes down through Michigan to get to Sarnia. And then that feeds the bulk of the supply needed for Ontario and connects with Line 9, which feeds the bulk of the product needed for Quebec. And so if you cut off that line, you are cutting off Ontario and Quebec. So I would encourage the ministers to either understand how our integrated pipeline system works and start looking at ways that we would be able to practically respond, because there's no point in making empty threats that cannot be executed on.
Alberta's premier began making inroads and building a relationship with the incoming Trump administration right after his election. While the other premiers and the Trudeau Liberals started picking fights with Trump, our premier started building bridges and reinforcing a friendship and a partnership. Why? Because her job is to protect us, not bring it all down because Doug Ford in Ontario wasn't smart enough to do what she did. Alberta has put up with enough. We pay billions of dollars in transfer payments to support the rest of the country because we have a healthy, resource-based economy and we want to keep it that way. And much of that has to do with our oil and gas trade with the United States. In turn, we have had our energy projects prohibited through an onerous and absolutely insane DEI approval process. We've had emissions caps and carbon taxes placed on our industry designed to kill it. We've been forced into a monopoly with the United States because the federal government abandoned a series of export pipelines which would guarantee us international market access and international prices for our oil and gas. Instead, now we're forced to sell it at a reduced rate to our only foreign buyer, the United States. And now we're asked to throw our jobs, our economy, and our livelihoods onto Justin Trudeau's dumpster fire to prove our patriotism and our allegiance to a country that has abused us.
So yes, premiers should be advocating for their own industries, their own country, their own communities, but they should also put their country first, as every single premier except Danielle Smith did.
And yet, we still want to help. We want to continue that economic activity I told you about so that we can support a country that will be absolutely hammered by Trump's tariffs, thanks to Justin Trudeau's combative, petty and adversarial relationship with the incoming president of our single largest trading partner.
Now, it shouldn't be that way. It wasn't supposed to be that way. We were supposed to be on a steady, if difficult sometimes, march towards progress. And yet, just a few weeks ago, the United States voted for a second time to not elect its first woman president. Everywhere, women's rights and women's progress is under attack, overtly and subtly. But I want you to know that I am, and always will be, a proud feminist. You will always have an ally in me and in my government.
Here's what I want to do. The things that I just told you about the amount of money and jobs, not just in Alberta, but across the country that are at stake here, and those facts about how Ontario and Quebec get their oil from Alberta, but through the United States, well, I want to tell the rest of the country, and I want to tell Doug Ford, because the mainstream media seems universal in their chorus line, saying that Premier Danielle Smith is un-Canadian for trying to save a huge part of the Canadian economy. They say she's not doing her part. It's just not true. Albertans have done their part and they continue to do their parts, but we won't lose everything for a country that doesn't appreciate us, for a prime minister who said he would phase out our oil and gas and that there was no business case for it.
We will do what we can to contribute to the global supply of energy by increasing our capacities in the short term and explore ways to see if it makes sense to export LNG, and if there's a business case for it, to export LNG directly to Europe.
Except insofar as it can be used as an international cudgel in a fight with the Americans. The Canadian public is not going to get these facts from the mainstream media. I want to take the Rebel News billboard truck to the streets of Toronto and Ottawa. If I can raise enough money, I'll take it to other cities too. I want to show my fellow Canadians what they're asking us to do, not just to ourselves, but to you too.
I think it's very clear that right now, Pierre Poilievre, who wants to be Prime Minister for all Canadians, has a choice to make. Either he stands up to fight for all Canadians alongside all premiers and the federal government that are doing that, or he chooses to stand with Danielle Smith, Kevin O'Leary, and ultimately Donald Trump.
If you want to help me get this message out and send a message to the politicians asking us to self-immolate because the Liberals want to be the leaders of the anti-Trump cabal in the world, please go to handsoffalberta.com. Thank you. For Rebel News, for my fellow Albertans, and for the men and women of the Canadian oil patch, I'm Sheila Gunn-Reid. Take a message to the streets of Canada, explaining what Trudeau and many of the other premiers are asking Alberta to do to ourselves in some misplaced act of patriotism. They're asking us to kill hundreds of thousands of jobs, not just in Alberta, but across the country, and we will not do it again. Please go to handsoffalberta.com to sign the petition and get involved.